In this podcast, we will explore the topic of the Yalta Conference and the Potsdam Conference. The Yalta Conference was in February 1945. At Yalta, the superpowers agreed on the Declaration of Liberated Europe. This was designed to aid peoples liberated from Nazi control. Germany would be forced to pay reparations, which are payments to the victors after the war. Stalin, however, disagreed with the other powers as to the amount of reparations. Other things that were decided upon was that Germany would be reduced in size, it would be split up and demilitarized. Nazi war criminals would be tried after the war was over. Future governments in Eastern Europe would be decided by free elections. Poland would fall under the Soviet sphere of influence, but would be run under a democratic government. There was still some tension over Poland, as the leaders had disputed the results of free elections there. The Soviets would declare war on Japan after Germany was defeated, and the UN, which is called the United Nations, would be founded. So at the Yalta Conference, the countries there were the USA, the Soviet Union, and Britain. And at this conference, there was still tension over Poland, as the leaders had disputed the results of free elections there. Let's have a recap about what would happen to Eastern Europe after the war, as agreed in the Yalta Conference. Poland would fall under the Soviet sphere of influence, but would be run under a democratic government, and future governments in Eastern Europe would be decided by free elections. Germany was defeated in May 1945. Then in August, Japan was defeated on VJ Day. The Potsdam Conference happened between July and August 1945. It was the third and final meeting between the USA, Britain, and the Soviet Union. There were some leadership changes since the previous Yalta Conference. Franklin D. Roosevelt had died in April 1945 and was replaced by Harry S. Truman. After the UK general election in July 1945, Clement Attlee replaced Churchill during the conference. The Nazi Party was to be banned. War criminals were to be prosecuted, which means they would be tried in court, and Germany was to be reduced in size and divided into 4 occupied zones, controlled by the USA, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin would also be divided along the same lines, and this was agreed at the Potsdam Conference. They also discussed how they would rebuild Europe. A council of foreign ministers was set up to organize rebuilding of Europe. The Soviet Union was going to receive 25% of the industrial output from the other 3 occupied zones. Truman, who was from the US, wanted free democratic elections to happen in the Eastern European countries, which were liberated by the Soviet Union, but Stalin was not too keen on this idea. So there were some differences between Truman and Stalin. Truman was from the US and Stalin was from the Soviet Union. Truman wanted a free democratic election in the Eastern European countries, which had liberated by the Soviet Union, but Stalin did not want this. Let's have a think back to the Yalta Conference. What was there tension over? There was still tension over Poland, as the leaders had disputed the results of the free election there. As a final recap, let's think about the Potsdam Conference. What was agreed? One agreement was that the Nazi Party would be banned and war criminals would be prosecuted and tried in court. Another agreement was that the Soviet Union was to receive 25% of the industrial output from the other 3 occupied zones of Germany. There were some leadership changes between the Yalta and the Potsdam Conference. Harry Truman replaced Roosevelt, and Clement Attlee replaced Winston Churchill in the Potsdam Conference in summer 1945. Truman left the conference unhappy about the agreements for Poland. Stalin did not want free democratic elections in Eastern Europe. At the Potsdam Conference, the Council of Foreign Ministers was set up to organize the rebuilding of Europe. So there were two conferences, the Yalta Conference and the Potsdam Conference.